You're gonna die, tree. Yes. I'll see you laughing now. You want some too? Hey my fellow friends, it's Chris from Shuckhead Gaming, and here's my review for A Township Tale, developed and published by Alta. And while A Township Tale has been available for free over on the PC, this review will be focused on the new Quest release, launching July 15th, 2021 for $9.99. Of course, that depends on your region. A Township Tale is a light RPG MMO that can be played solo, co-op, or in open online servers with up to 8 players. Build up an abandoned town by exploring, foraging, and crafting your way through a semi-open world, opening up new paths and new dangers along the way. This game certainly isn't going to be for everyone, and the port to the Quest isn't without its issues. But for some, this could be just what they're looking for. Stick around and I'll explain to you why. As always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing, and for video updates, make sure you hit that bell icon. And on that note, it seems that YouTube has been doing some weird stuff with subscribing and bell icons, so if you guys want to be subscribed and you were subscribed, maybe just take a quick look, make sure you still are, and that you have the notifications on that you want. Thanks guys. And finally, Shuckhead Gaming has a Patreon now, and your support is always appreciated, as it helps me convince my wife why I spend all my spare time on the channel. Plus, you get some extra stuff, so check that out as well. Okay, enough selling myself. Let's kick things off with a look at graphics. A Township Tale has been around now on PC for more than a few years, and while certainly no visual stunner, its almost Rec Room visual style was more than serviceable and created for many a little cartoon world to run away to. This same visual style makes its way to Quest, and while it still works over on the lower powered hardware, this semi-open world game does see some significant visual concessions, including a less than perfect frame rate, sure to make those with weak VR legs to suffer. In addition, the game does use a fairly aggressive foveated rendering technique, dropping the resolution on the sides of the screen in order to keep what you're looking at straight ahead looking decent. This is noticeable, and it does hurt the game's overall polish, but you do get used to it, and it does ensure that things that you need to see or read retain some level of sharpness. Now, what I didn't get used to, and easily the Quest version's largest visual hit, is the very poor draw distance, with massive amounts of texture and geometry pop-in being a consistent issue. Sometimes being so severe, I would be working in an area and at times not even know what was 50 feet away from me. A problem when you're trying to get an idea of what you can harvest in a given area, or running into an area only to run into 10 enemies that want to shoot their tree pollen at you. I don't know, you get the point. Now, this varied significantly based on where I was, but it was always an issue and did severely hurt my experience in the game. Now, that being said, I did adapt to this somewhat, and it never made the game unplayable, but it did make for some very bland moments as I adventured around the map. An issue that wasn't helped by the game's need to lower texture detail in many areas, while also removing many of the PC version's more sophisticated lighting techniques. All things I absolutely expected in a game world of this size being crammed onto the Quest. But you know what? Besides all the visual concessions I just mentioned, if you don't mind the game's simplified cartoon visual style going in and can put up with some visual jank, the game is, like I said, serviceable and certainly playable. Just keep your expectations in check when jumping in. Sound is up next. A Township Tale, when it comes to sound design, is a very short story, as the game certainly goes for a less is more approach. Forgoing much in the way of music, the game instead fills the sound mix with nature sounds and the pitter-patter of your feet as you run around the map foraging for resources, consequently making for a rather zen-type experience for those looking to just get lost in some rock or tree chopping. Now, my minimalist description of the sound design is in no way a mark against the game, for while this certainly isn't some massively ambitious sound mix, it fits the game's visual and gameplay style to a T. Again, think Rec Room's hyper-real cartoon approach to sound effects, and you will have a really good idea of what to expect. In-game voice chat is a thing here, and rightly so, as many will choose to jump into public servers and socialize. Speaking of which, this game does attract the Rec Room crowd, so take that whichever way you want, but just know that the game does have a mute option. In closing, besides some missing sound effects here and there, and a slight blandness to everything, I would say sound-wise, A Township Tale is perfectly fine. And that brings us to gameplay. First and foremost, I am a huge fan of crafting and survival games. I like the grind, managing inventory, and the sense of accomplishment that comes with progress. Unfortunately, with the exception of VR ports of games like No Man's Sky, Subnautica, and The Forest, VR hasn't really seen a game in this genre made just for VR gamers, with consequently Quest owners having none of the above games either, short of maybe a game like Raccoon Lagoon to a certain degree. Starting out in A Township Tale, you are greeted with a rather limited character creation tool, creating a legless avatar that oddly seems to have a brutal nasal infection. I don't understand what's up with that. Anyways, right off the hop, we are greeted with the majority of cosmetics on offer locked behind a paywall for the game's currency called talums, which can be purchased using real-world money, hence making it obvious how the game can be free on PC and sell for only $10 on the Quest. My character created, I was sequestered off to the game's tutorial server. Yes, this too can be online. In fact, it should be mentioned that regardless of whether you choose to play solo or with friends, this is an always online game. Here, the tutorial took me over the basics, and two things became immediately apparent. This is a game with a serious accessibility problem, and secondly, it loves to be obtuse in its explanation of in-game mechanics. In fact, it seems to willfully revel in it, an issue that became a frustrating staple of the game, and one I will expand on soon. Firstly, accessibility. There is no seated play option, something which is simply unacceptable in a game that one could easily play for hours at a time. In addition, every resource you find or harvest must be physically picked up off the ground, something you will do a lot of. In fact, that is easily 75% of the gameplay here in A Township Tale. Look, I can understand the developer's desire to make you literally work for your in-game progress, but this game seriously could use a grapple to pick up option and the ability to set your playing height. Regardless, I chose to play seated since I didn't have legs anyway, making picking up items off the ground less of a pain in the ass. And since I was on a solo server, I also didn't have to care that I looked like an amputee dragging myself across the ground. Here in the tutorial, the game teaches you the basics. Well, you think it would. First off, you learn that you must manage not only your health but your nutrition and fullness, making the goal to eat more wholesome food that fills your nutrition bar instead of just being full and having no nutrition, which consequently leads to greatly reducing your running speed. Unfortunately, this is a severely underdeveloped mechanic and was rarely anything more than an afterthought to just feed myself once in a while with meat. Outside of this, the tutorial painfully takes you through the basics, essentially giving you the bare minimum of instructions, referencing items you don't know about, and leaving out essential details of tools you will need to craft in order to complete a given tutorial task. Hence, making what could have been a 10-minute tutorial session an hour-long frustration fest. Eventually, tutorials completed and my irritation with the game primed, I created my own server, which, by the by, you can set up solo, private, or public. The world of Township Tale isn't procedural, meaning every server you visit will be the same essential layout. You can jump servers, but keep in mind your progress will not follow. Also worth mentioning is that while progress can be shared across the Quest and PC versions, cross-play is currently not available, likely due largely in part to the fact that the Quest version is missing some key aspects of the PC version, such as the climbing tower, the combat trials, and the forest expansion of the game, all of which are planned to be added at a later date. Now, the map of A Township Tale is a moderately large but restrictive area, consisting mostly of paths to certain areas of the game, whether that be areas in town such as the blacksmith or carpenter where you can craft various items, or the outlying areas such as the dust bowl or mine sections where you can forage for resources to craft items. And such begins the game's loop. First, you must craft a basic bag, made from a few easy-to-find resources. Consequently, the same bag I learned to make in the tutorial section, and since I just about had an aneurysm figuring out how to craft said bag, I had that down. Aimlessly exploring, I figured out I could scavenge enough resources of a certain kind to open up additional sections on the map. Yeah, another thing they don't explain to you. Hence, revealing more essential resources and resources you will need, as this is in many ways a game about gathering and making stuff, so you can gather more and make better stuff, to gather even more and make even better stuff. No stranger to open world crafting games, I actually love games that let me make my own fun, making my own missions for the day and choosing how I wanted to progress in the world. And while this game certainly has that hook to it, After a few hours of solo play, I began to realize that while A Township Tale attempts to be an open world RPG MMO, it's actually an extremely simple game that is neither complex or deep enough to remain interesting to those looking to make their own fun, nor focused enough to keep people on task that want to just complete the game. For at this stage in my playthrough, there really seems to be no endgame, no narrative to speak of, and really no incentive to play other than to open up the shops in town so you can use them fully, with the game's only real objective being that you attempt to venture into more dangerous areas, such as the pitch black mines, which reveal better loot chests the further down you venture, which are consequently defended by more dangerous enemies. Unfortunately, combat is rarely more than whacking at things with your sword or shooting your bow and arrow, so while there is combat in A Township Tale, it lacks any real depth that would keep it interesting. That being said, the game does have a limited perk system, which consists of a handful of hidden shrines throughout the map that, once discovered, allow you to unlock and specialize in certain skills, focused on either a crafting trade or something more combat focused. However, that is it when it comes to RPG elements of upgrading your character. You see, the whole point of Township Tale, or at least the way in which the developers expect you to play this, is as a social experience, and one in which players will take on specific roles, harvesting and crafting within their given trade, then exchanging with other players in order to build up their gear. The problem with this is, outside of the fun you might have goofing around and running around the map with friends, there just isn't any real reason to keep going, as the game simply lacks any form of quests or missions to really prepare for and venture into, making all of your advancements in gear only really useful to collect more resources and getting better loot boxes, which often contain, you guessed it, resources and crafting items. As such, once I'd opened up the majority of the full map and had either found or crafted some decent tools, I found myself looking at the trades that I hadn't done, and I had no real incentive to learn them. Learn them being the key takeaway here, as the game's sheer avoidance and commitment to explaining even the key aspects of anything in the game began to feel like it was simply being vague to pad what is essentially a rather simple crafting system that really lacks much in the way of complexity or variety, but instead decides to make it a literal chore, and made me feel like the town idiot as I struggled to decipher the simplest recipes, find resources based on pictograms I didn't understand, and work machines that aren't explained, leaving me no choice but to either trial and error until I hated the game, venture onto a public server to ask for help, or, as many YouTube videos had suggested, go onto the game's online wiki page and read up, which in my opinion is just bad game design. And that brings me to fun factor, my final review. Over on PC, this game has appealed to the Rec Room crowd, and that doesn't surprise me one bit. Not unlike Raccoon Lagoon, a similar social crafting type game on the Quest, A Township Tale often feels like a game that you might expect to find in Rec Room if Rec Room themselves decided to make a Rec MMO. Despite my visual and gameplay complaints, the truth is, I did find myself having fun once I figured out some of the game's key systems and was able to start exploring and scavenging. Because yeah, I love this type of game loop. Unfortunately, around the 8 to 10 hour mark, which mind you could have been cut in half easily if the game had decided to actually explain itself, I could already see the end of any meaningful progression, and the "why am I doing this again" started to kick in hard, leading me to feel that any long-term enjoyment here will be for those looking for a social hub and an excuse to hang out, or for those simply looking for a more zen VR experience where chopping wood and mining rock is a needed break from life's complexities. As you guys may know, I rate games on the basis of buy it, burn it, or wait on it. Well, it's $10 and free if you have a PC to play it on. As such, it's less of a cash commitment here as it is one of time. This game definitely skews young though, and I can tell you, it definitely has its fans over on the PC who seem to have a lot of fun playing Village. If you're like me though, and you love the grind of crafting survival games, there is certainly some fun here and consequently benefits from having little competition if you only have a Quest. However, its fun is limited, and for those who don't like the crafting game grind, don't want to spend all their time bending over, or are sensitive to poor frame rates when turning in VR, this is likely just going to piss you off. Anyways guys, that's it for me. Thanks for stopping by and supporting the channel. If you like this content, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more VR content from me, guys, please consider subscribing and making sure you turn on all notifications. Thanks guys, and I'll catch you on my next video.